You guys know that there's only one call to ministry, that is to serve God. But do you also know that the shapes of the pulpit can look very different? We're going to talk about that today, so don't go anywhere. Hey, welcome back to Learn Together. I am super excited to continue this journey of growing and learning with you. Today, we're going to talk about ministry in higher education. So, some of you guys may think, okay, I'm not called to higher education, but some of you guys are thinking, I would love to be in this ministry, but I just don't know how to get there. We all have to educate ourselves. I mean, you're a credentialed woman, and that means you went to some sort of higher education to be where you're at today. But we all understand this liner, lifelong learner, always learn, educate, right? The leaders never stop learning. But the learning always leads us to some awesome destinations. And it could be on higher education, it could be schools. So today we're going to talk about that. And so if you maybe you felt discouraged, like you're called to higher education, but you just feel like there's no place for you, I just encourage you to just kick that lie away and be inspired by these amazing stories that you're about to hear. I'm going to be inviting 3 female educators that are active in Christian higher education. Well, they didn't get there overnight, but there's a journey, there's a story, and I want you to feel inspired and motivated by those stories. Maybe you never considered this ministry, but who knows? At the end of this conversation, you might be thinking about it. So the first person, and they're all highly qualified educators and ministers. By the way, I'm going to call up my friend Debbie. Dr. Debbie Fulthorp. And so she's going to be just saying hi to her crowd and her crew. Hello, how are you doing?
Hi, Sahi. Hello, everybody. Doing great. Thank you for this opportunity.
Oh, I just love having you. Why don't you give a little shout out to your school and students? Say, hey, I'm here. I'm representing you.
I'm from Grand Canyon University, and we always say "lopes up." so,
Right.
um, yeah. Hello, everybody at GCU, and I'm just excited to represent.
Awesome. How long have you been in the higher education?
I have been working in higher education since 2015, 2016. I was an adjunct professor with SUM Bible College and Theological Seminary. I was an adjunct with North Point Bible College and an adjunct with SAGU for one summer. So
Wow.
I've been doing higher ed since probably 2015.
Wow, this is amazing. 7th year. That's pretty amazing. So you already kind of talked about it, but let's talk about your journey. You are doing, right now, you're also teaching, but you did a lot of adjunct. And so how did that first door open up to begin with? Who gave you that opportunity? How did that happen?
Oh goodness, the first door opened up after I had exhausted all ministry doors. I was looking for a pastorate. We were in between ministry positions, and we were actually in North Carolina. Um, and I had put my resume out in so many places and gotten
Mhm.
no back and gotten a lot of pushback even for my gender and my degree.
Wow.
But I had a friend who knew somebody at SUM, and they're like, "Why don't you send me your application, your resume, your CV?" I was like, "What's a
Mhm.
CV?" Because I never even put one together. A
Resume,
curriculum
right?
vitae, yeah,
Mhm.
just the second part of the resume. And I put that all together, and they connected me with SUM. I had a interview, and that started my journey working as a professor.
Wow. Everybody will think like, okay, well, she's already teaching. It was an easy transition, but there's a discouragement part, like you apply for many things. You know what it's like to be in a dark place and like, oh my gosh, am I even called to ministry? But this educational door kind of happened out of the blue, you almost feel like, but it actually wasn't. You said you knew somebody. So what I'm thinking is that networking is so important. It doesn't happen from one thing to another just out of the blue. Everything happens for a reason and it's all connected. So somebody that you knew knew your story, encouraged you. That's
Yes.
pretty cool. So now you talked about your education. So you are a doctor that I can see right there in front of your name, which I'm hoping to get in a few weeks. Yes. All right. So what was your dissertation topic?
Well, my dissertation topic, well, I have a doctorate of ministry in leadership from AGTS, and we actually do projects. So it's more practical. It's kind of like a marriage between a dissertation and a hands-on practical ministry experience. So my project was creating a course for women in ministry, Pentecostal theology. It is called Spirit Empowered Women in Church Leadership. So I did three different things. I created a course for undergrad students, and I was thinking of our AG institutions. I created a course for our networks so that we could use that in our networks and encourage other women to get ordained and to pursue ministry callings. And I also created a course for the local church. So it was three
Mm.
pronged because I believe all three of those work together and we need each other for this journey that we're on in our Christian walk.
Ah, that is so good. And that leads me to the next question that you are very passionate about. What is the role of local churches in preparing and equipping aspiring female Christian scholars and educators? You're just talking about all those relationship work hand in hand. So what is that role specifically of the local churches?
I think the role is to encourage women to be who they are called to be and not be afraid of the questions that certain women might ask. I think that local churches leadership in particular struggle with thinking that academics is way up here and everybody else is down here, and that's not the truth. We're all together, we're in this together, and if you
Right.
encourage women to ask the questions, and you might not know the answers, and that's okay. You don't have
Mhm.
to know every answer. Just encourage them to keep following God's call, pursuing those questions and digging deep and researching it, and just I guess encouraging them to go where God leads. Because for me, it wasn't necessarily a thing that I knew God wanted me to do, but it was just a matter of me following the Lord along and the next door opening and the next door opening. And so just following God's call and not being scared of any weird differences that you might think
Hmm.
of, like somebody being more intellectual, and there's
Mhm.
nothing like that really. I think that people are just gifted in different areas.
Yes, that's so good. And I think I'm also hearing normalizing that culture. Women who have the knowledge of the Bible, we are responsible to use that knowledge to make disciples, right? And so,
Yes.
what a perfect opportunity in local churches as you are equipping future educators and scholars, just kind of opening that opportunity, not being scared of the language that you use, right? And just kind of doing that at the local level, kind of normalizing that already, then it will be a good bridge to the next season. Well, I just really appreciate your dissertation, first of all, personally, because I also work in a local church and educating my students as well. So I do see those connections. But don't go just yet. Okay, stay right there, and I'm gonna call up now. Next guest is Professor Melissa Falk, and she is also an educator. I'm gonna have her say a shout out to her students in school. Why don't you start that?
Sure. Thank you, Sehi. I'm excited to be with you all today. I am a professor at the University of Valley Forge here in the Philadelphia suburb area. And we are so excited about what God has been doing in the campus in the last couple months. It really seems like God is on the move, and our heart is to develop leaders who will live lives of service for the church and the world. And that's not church over here and world over here, but it's
Right.
both. So no matter what our students
Absolutely.
are studying, if it's ministry or if it's criminal justice, they're all called to be servants in the church and the world.
That's right. That's very important because we're talking
Mhm.
about being called to ministry in various shapes of the
Yes.
pulpit, right? That's so cool. Well, you're serving at a school where the president is a Korean American.
Yes.
Yoo-hoo! yeah. Yeah, President David, tell him hi for us.
I will.
Or yeah, I like to pick on him when I can. He's a great man. So let's just also talk about your journey, because it's important for our audience to realize that you didn't just get there overnight. So just like we heard from Debbie, Dr. Debbie, why don't you share your story? How did you get to where you're at today?
Sure. Well, I sensed a call to ministry at a really young age, about 5 or 6 years old. And the only kind of model, though, that I saw for women in ministry was like pastor's wife, or kind of doing women's conferences on the weekends. All of those things are wonderful. So I'm not downplaying that at all.
Right.
But I really had a very limited model. There were no women on staff at churches. I come from a very small town in the northeast of Pennsylvania. But one thing that was consistent throughout kind of my growing up years in the church was every Sunday and Wednesday and Sunday night back in the day, we would pray for someone who had been raised up out of our church. It was her home church, and had been serving. And that woman was Dr. Joanne Butrin. And so even just hearing about a woman who, I didn't see her often, she was on the mission field or she was in Springfield, hearing it was such kind of an eye-opening thing for me. And so I encourage churches, even if you don't have women on staff, to have models of women's ministry and women in ministry that are kind of in the front and forth center, because it always kept it in my mind that was a possible path for me.
Right.
And yeah. And so eventually I actually came to the University of Valley Forge. It was called Valley Forge Christian College then. And our president, David Kim, was actually a student here at the time when I was. So we sometimes look at each other in staff meetings and just say, how did we get here? It's just amazing. The testimony of God's grace. And while I was here at the Forge, I really had a passion for intercultural ministry started in my heart. And I came from a town that didn't have a lot of multicultural experiences for me. And so it was kind of an eye-opening thing. And so at the same time, in my preaching classes, my professors were calling out a gift there and saying there's something here that you should pursue. And so when I graduated, I became a children and youth pastor. And after a few years, I think about 5 years of serving bivocationally, I needed some extra income during the week. And I got a job at Columbia University as an admin assistant to a professor. And it started to open up my eyes to kind of the world of higher ed. And after serving kind of in that church world for about 5 years, I realized all of the tools that I had gotten at Valley Forge, they were used so much, so often, they're starting to get dull. And I needed to sharpen those tools again. And so decided to go back to higher ed. And so I went to pursue my master's at Regent University. And while I was at Regent, I became a staff member and started to manage their Doctor of Ministry office. And so I did that for about 7 years. And at that time, kind of as Debbie mentioned, doors open and you walk through them. Regent had just started kind of a professional program or degree completion, which is turned into their undergrad program now. And so at that early stage, someone said, hey, do you want to teach a spiritual formation class? And I was able to work in the Doctor of Ministry during the day, kind of finish my coursework, teach and develop courses for undergrad, and then a little bit on the master's level. And after 7 years there, went back to become a senior pastor of a Korean American church, Sehi, in the Northeast, and have been ordained with the assemblies. And so while I worked at the church, another opportunity opened to work at a master's program for kind of a mission-based international seminary. And I loved teaching those courses. And several years after that, I wound up here at the University of Valley Forge. And so it's a blessing to be here and to kind of share my experiences with people.
Wow, your journey kind of tells us this importance of being available and just saying yes. Whenever they open doors, and you just kind of like don't sit there, oh, is this a good idea? Is this a bad idea? You are right there, fully engaged, fully in. And whenever there was an opportunity, you just went for it.
Yes. Yeah.
Friends, I think we need that kind of attitude. We need that kind of a courage and boldness. And sometimes we say yes because like we don't know what else to do, but God shows you exactly what you need to do. So go for it. That's so cool. So what was your project on? Was it kind of relevant to what you're doing now? Did it help, or how did it work?
Well, yes, it's kind of interesting how you can see, looking back, just the way that God is weaving things sovereignly.
Yeah.
And when I left the senior pastorate in my church, I felt God say, go, but I didn't feel him tell me where the next step was.
Yes.
But the go and the release after 6 years was very clear. And so I wound up going home and kind of laying everything down. And as a woman in ministry, I remember thinking, like, women pastorates, as Debbie mentioned, there's not always a ton of opportunities. And I thought, how can you like lay this down not knowing that there's going to be something to pick up? And so I went home to my family area to spend some time with them. And I got a call from someone saying, can you help us at another university? And I did that a little bit on the side. But then I went into a 1-year training program at a hospital in chaplaincy, in clinical pastoral education, that was in my home area. And I never would have kind of jumped into that, except I was home and saying, Lord, what's next? And this opportunity opened up the door that has really then kind of reset the trajectory. So while I was in the hospital setting, I started my DMin at Asbury. And I'm like you, still writing my dissertation right now and praying that it will it'll happen. And I had a topic based on my ministry experience about healthy models of second generation Korean American ministry. And I was actually in Korea at a residency when the Lord started to speak to me, and I had a great conversation with some of my leadership, and this new project emerged. And so I have been studying how that training model in the hospital, how they train chaplains to do the work, how studying that may help to identify best practices in that will help pastors and church leaders have confidence and competence when dealing with crises. Because often I would meet as a chaplain with pastors coming to visit people in their church, and they would say, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say.
Yeah.
And so I saw a training in that chaplaincy program that I had not received in bachelor's, master's, and even doctorate, that was really focused in pastoral care, which I knew as a pastor is where a huge part of my ministry had always focused. And so that's my focus right now. And as I was finishing up that chaplaincy residency, the call came to come to Valley Forge. And normally I would be, working in kind of the ministry world, preaching and teaching in that area. I'm in behavioral sciences, doing pastoral care and teaching grief, death, and dying. I'll teach that tomorrow, and pastoral counseling and classes that really focus on emotional health of leaders and things that are coming out of that chaplaincy experience. That chaplaincy experience came out of a wilderness experience when the Lord asked me to lay down the pastorate. And so again, it's going through these open doors always leads us to the next thing.
Yeah, that seems to be a very clear theme, right, in our journey. And I love it. For those of you that are listening in, if you are currently pastoring, there is an opportunity for so many other things, but it works hand in hand, and they're not like one thing versus another. It's all because it's all about God. It's all about God's ministry.
Absolutely.
And so I'm just so excited. And I truly, truly agree what you said about the lack of that side of education on the compassion ministry. We just don't learn. I went through 3 Bible colleges and universities. I do feel like it's lacking because my husband is a hospice chaplain.
Yeah.
And the training that he does, I'm like, oh my gosh, I wish pastors will know,
Yes.
So what you're saying is totally true. So here's my question for you. Since you transitioned from pulpit to podium ministry and chaplaincy, so many other things, right? Other than Sunday morning pulpit service. So let's talk about the journey from solely being a practitioner in the church setting to becoming an equipper of a new generation outside the church. What's important about that, and how can we do well?
Sure. Well, I think when I was in Bible school, even, as an 18-year-old, I always appreciated the professors who were practitioners that weren't talking about, something that they did 25 years ago, but something that they were currently doing. And so even in a pastoral ministry setting, I knew that everything that I was kind of experiencing, whether it was the good, the bad, or the ugly of ministry, that I was banking that in my heart for a reason.
Mhm.
And that it was not just for me, but it was for those that I would equip. And so it has not been, it's not the easiest transition to say, I'm not going to do, I'm going to equip. Because part of me still wants to be the one always doing and leading. And I'm having to step back now and say, now is my opportunity to pour in. And we at University of Valley Forge, we do a lot of missions trips, but we always call them student-led missions trips.
Mhm.
And so my first summer after I was here, I was able to go with a team to Spain, to Madrid, and to work with some incredible alums and missionaries there. And I remember talking to my mentor, Dr. Joanne Smith, who's here at the Forge. And she said, when you go on these trips, she was coordinating the trips for us. She said, make sure you realize these are student-led missions trips.
Mhm.
They do the preaching, they do the leading, they do the organizing. You get to step back and be the cheerleader.
Wow.
And when you stop wrestling the need to do, and I stepped back and said, let me support from behind. I just there's such a beauty of coming alongside people that have this burden in front of them that they're trying to push, and saying, you know what, let me put my shoulder to this and push with you, and to kind of see them find success in their ministry. It's so exciting.
There's nothing like being a door opener. There's such a unique joy about that, an equipper, right? And we're not quitting what we used to do. We're just doing it, multiplying. That's so exciting.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. Don't go anywhere either. And we're going to finish this doctor together. We can do this. So I'm going to call up Dr. Joy Qualls. And she is also an incredible, stellar scholar practitioner in our movement. Dr. Joy, how are you?
Good morning, Sehi. It's good to be with you.
Very good to have you. So let's do a little shout out to your peeps.
Sure. Well, I currently serve as an associate dean and associate professor at Biola University in La Mirada, California. But I am an alum of Vanguard University just down the road, and where my husband's teaching classes this morning. So I'll make sure to give both sides of my heart, my alma mater and my current duty station, equal props this morning.
Both are amazing schools. I know a lot of my friends wanting to go, and I think they're going to appreciate this conversation coming from you. Also, I mean, you are an assistant dean, you said, and that is a pretty heavy duty, right?
Yes,
Very.
I'm moving more out of the classroom and into the administration side of higher education right now.
And that is another level of transition. So let's talk about that. And was it in your plan when you began this ministerial journey? How did you end up being an assistant where you're at exactly right now?
Sure. Well, none of this was really in my plan. When I was an undergraduate student at what was then Southern California College, now Vanguard University, I intended to go into government and politics, and had intentions to work on Capitol Hill, which I did eventually spend 2 years on the Hill in my career. But I can say there were mentors all along the way who said, well, when you have your PhD, you can do this. And when you're leading in this space, you can do this. And I would kind of brush them off during that season. But after a couple of years on the Hill, I had a distinct experience with the Lord where he asked me to walk away from those dreams and goals and do what it is that he was calling me to do. So I think I may be the only person who has left a job on Capitol Hill to go be a church secretary because I didn't know what the next thing was going to be. I had done a master's in, all three of my degrees are in communication and rhetoric, which means we just study how we talk about things. And I met and had lunch with a mentor from my master's program, ironically, a wonderful Catholic scholar from Regent University who slid a PhD application across the table to me and said, put this sheath out before the Lord and see what happens. And so I would spend the next 6 years doing a traditional PhD program. I did 2 full years of coursework. I thought I would do 2 years of PhD work, but we moved to Springfield, Missouri during that time for my husband to attend the seminary. And so That was really providential because I was where the archives were, so it would serve my research and work well. But I think what I've discovered over that time is that one, God doesn't waste anything. So I had done several administrative jobs during the time of my education. I had worked on Capitol Hill, like I said. And so, as much as I love the classroom and I love being with students, scholarship and administration have sort of emerged as my greater strengths in this space. And so, after 15 years in the classroom, I am moving more and more towards higher ed administration, which, like you said, is a whole other ballgame of leadership, but also finding myself more and more in the local church, talking about the work that I do, which is my great gift, to serve the local church in that way. And so it's an interesting season, not one that I had planned.
Wow, but better plan. Absolutely. Yes. Just like Dr. Melissa Falk earlier, I'm going to call you doctor, right? Says that the importance of visibility, even at a local level and at a different organization. And so you serving in your current role is important. And just by being you and doing your role, it is empowering. Your dissertation, which I've coded many times for my papers, and actually other people, like just in this conversation, yes, I did tap into your resources in the writing, so thank you. So let's talk about that briefly. You said it's about rhetoric, so
Yes.
yeah.
So I study how we talk about things. So I looked at the history of the role of women in the Assemblies of God, but I examined the conversation. So I looked at a lot of minutes of general council meetings to look at the discussions on policy that had taken place. I looked at letters that had been written between district and national officials, and particularly women on the ground, as it were, during the early days of Pentecostal ministry, and out of that, tracked the history of the. I describe it as the Pentecostal movement, but really the Assemblies of God serves as a case study, because what I wanted to see was we in the Assemblies of God have the most generous policy on the service of women in the ministry. So if you are unaware, the Assemblies of God in our bylaws, as part of our Constitution, it's not just a position paper that we've written on, but is actually in our bylaws, allows for the service of women of all levels of ministry, the local church, on the mission field, in evangelism, at network, what we used to call district level, national level, higher education. There are no limitations on the role and ministry of women in the Assemblies of God. But we haven't always lived up to that ideal. And while our numbers are great and growing, they're not much different than they were in the earliest days of Pentecost. So we still have some work to do in encouraging women to engage in ministry, to become credentialed and ordained, and to promote the general welfare of women in terms of getting jobs and having the proper training and things of that nature. So what I was looking at was, at the root of how we talk about things is really how we live out things. So the challenge has been, again, while we have this policy, our practice and the way that we've talked about the role of women in our fellowship has created confusion. It has created dissonance, and sometimes blocked the path of women for whom the path should have been straight. So if our policy is so open and we're experiencing those same challenges, what do women in other segments of Pentecostalism, and then in greater evangelicalism, where that freedom may not be there, what do they encounter? And so that was the gist of my study.
That's really, really good, because that is the conversation, ongoing conversation. We're seeking answer, right? And so if you haven't tapped into a resource, just go look it up. It's pretty incredible. And you can see this history, like you said, the conversation about regarding women in ministries, and we can be part of the solution. So
that's right.
Start reading that. Yeah.
And if a dissertation is not your speed, it is actually available also in book form,
That's
at
right.
a more popular level, entitled "God Forgive Us for Being Women," and you can find that at all of the places you get your books. So you don't have to go find the dissertation
yes.
and pay the big bucks to download that if you don't.
Yeah. You know what? I actually have that book also. Yes. We're going to just make that link available in our comments. So just go ahead and look it up, and that will be a great resource to you. So your dissertation and your life experience really a great foundation for my important question. So the opportunities for female educators in the next 5-10 years as we're looking forward, I know the number is going to increase, but how can these higher education institutes cultivate this culture that welcomes and fully incorporates female educators? What do you see?
Yeah, I think first of all, we have to dedicate funding specifically for the training of female academics. So in the broader academic world, state universities, larger PhD programs fund their students to come and study there. Well, in private Christian higher education, that's harder to do. So you're competing for those resources with others. And I think those of us in Christian higher education have to make an effort to specifically seek out funding opportunities so that the next generation of academic leaders, male and female, but I would say specifically targeted at female academics and people of color who are underrepresented in our education institutions to provide those opportunities. I think the Assemblies of God serves again as a great case study for that. When Dr. Wood, Dr. George O. Wood, who we just celebrated his life this last weekend, pushed for specific opportunities for women ministers under the age of 40 and our underrepresented minority and ethnic groups in the fellowship to have specific seats at the table. There was a lot of pushback about quotas and affirmative action, but the reality is that by creating those specific opportunities, the doors have opened, the floodgates have opened in districts and in churches and in other spaces where for years and years and years we were not seeing a trickle up, but we have seen a trickle down of those opportunities. So I would say that has to be key for our presidents and our board of trustees at our institutions of Christian higher education to specifically focus and intend resources towards the training and promotion of young women and people of color in the area of academic excellence.
I love that. Hey, show me where your money goes. I'll show you where your heart is. Sounds like a little bit of the Bible, right? Yes. I love this. A great conversation. I'm going to call up our other guests here, Melissa and Debbie, such incredible leaders leading in practical areas as scholars and educators. So we have some common themes kind of rising from within your own stories and studies. But here, as a final thought to our audience directly, whether they're in education already, a lot of adjunct student teachers maybe working for various schools, or maybe that are wanting to be even an adjunct, but they don't know how to get there. From your own experiences and passions in your studies, what are some good wisdom that you can give? Let's go with Dr. Debbie and then Melissa and Dr. Joy. Let's do that.
Well, I would say keep pursuing God and pursuing what God has called you to do. And not that the doors are going to open magically or anything like that, but just keep your hand to the plow, keep working, keep doing the things that God gives you to do, and He's going to open them eventually. It may not be what you think. It might be completely different. For me, I tried 5 years to be a part of Grand Canyon University. And then when the door finally opened, I was like, I don't want to try again because I don't want to get a no. And my friend was like, well, I'm just going to put your resume through again. I had another friend. So networking, just being who you are, trusting God with your story and with your life and ministry, and allowing Him to take the crowbar and open up the box that maybe you've put Him in. It may not look like what you think it will be. I wanted to be in an AG institute, and that happened maybe one summer, and then the rest, and it hasn't, but it's given me a broader platform to speak and to share and to minister. So I guess just be ready. Step in, step up, and step out to what God has for you, as my friend Sherry Sampson would say.
That's awesome. Yeah. Dr. Melissa, you're almost there. Come on.
I think I echo Debbie in practitioners make the best professors. And so I think if you have a heart to serve in higher ed, the worst thing that you can do is sit back and wait for a higher ed job to come to you. That won't happen. But throughout Scripture, we always hear the echoing of that theme. And as they were going, or while they were on the way, and I think that as we do along the way, those doors do open. And so serve wholeheartedly. And as we say all the time, your gifts do make room for you. And when those doors open, walk through them. I almost didn't do that chaplaincy year, and it has unlocked the door for everything else that's come since then. And so just keep being a practitioner and allow the Lord to open those doors and to elevate as you're going.
Perfect. Dr. Joy.
So higher education is in a great season of change and in some ways a little bit of turmoil. And so Christian higher education as a sliver of that. And so to be perfectly honest with you, I think there's an opportunity for people who want to sort of explore higher education as both a partnership to what they do in their ministry, as well as, perhaps kind of feeling out whether or not this is the space that you want to be in. What is lacking right now are full-time, what we would call tenure track, the kind of traditional professor path. That's really where it's hard to get in these days. So what I would say to people wanting to think about Christian higher education in particular is there's never been a better time to be an adjunct because many financial models are requiring us to look more towards that space. I can talk about the opportunities and challenges of that, but the door is open. If you're willing to serve part-time, if you're willing to be a bivocational professor, as it were, we talk about that in ministry a lot, but as a bivocational professor. So I would say now is the time to dip your toes in the water, as it were, and see whether or not those waters part, because it just is a season where that contingent faculty is so necessary in order to best serve our students. And so so I would encourage that as well. And the other thing I would say is to pursue online and non-traditional spaces as well. Again, having lived through the last 2 years of the pandemic, we've come to find out that we had online education and we had in-person education, but things like remote education didn't exist. And so we're building the plane as we're flying it in many situations. So again, if you're somebody who is comfortable in that distance environment, I think opportunities are more prevalent in those spaces than they have ever been before. So I look at the challenges that we're facing in Christian higher education, and I don't see roadblocks. I see opportunities. I see spaces for engagement. And so I would tell you there's no better time now to think about coming into the higher education sphere, especially if it's not something where you would be depending upon this for the primacy of your income and things like that. And like Melissa said, we need those people who are working in both spaces to be able to say, okay, here's how it functions in the real world, as opposed to how it functions in the classroom. And those voices are really needed.
Wow, it's so encouraging. Number one, there's an opportunity. Number one, women are staying obedient to the call, right? And whatever, we're like chameleons. We're going to be whatever God wants us to do, right? And so God just opened up a door. We're going to just go right into it. I've taught in class and online, just very unique platforms. Love both. So there is an opportunity, and I'm just so encouraging. But most of all, for me as an interviewer, I appreciate the visibility. I appreciate the representation. I appreciate your obedience. I believe our audience can say the same thing. Thank you for being there And thank you for walking through that dark times to be where you're at today. That speaks volume to us. So we're encouraged. We're very hopeful. So ladies and brothers, let's continue to obey whatever the shape of the pulpit. Doesn't have to be in the church. It could be both bivocational, or it could be something else. But one thing always leads to other as we go, like Melissa said. Love you, ladies. Thank you so much for the wisdom you've shared today. Friends, don't go anywhere, because right now, Crystal's going to pick up the mic and she's about to give you leadership 2 cents.
I was incredibly grateful a while back to be able to attend a Convoy of Hope women's event, where much of the conversation stemmed around how can we band together to step into the education of women around the world, hearing stories of how education changes the destiny of women. As we listened to our professors today, I thought, what an awesome opportunity that we have to step into higher levels of education, to really love the Lord our God with all our hearts, with all our minds, and with all our strengths. As I think about global education for girls, I think about Amanda Gorman, our U.S. Poet Laureate, who spoke at our presidential inauguration, and she spoke a beautiful poem. I'd like to read, as we close today, a poem about how important global education for girls really is. Power unfurls in a girl at school. Like the first pages of a book unwritten, she's a story waiting to ignite. An educated girl is like the question the first rain tosses at the earth after the drought. Are you ready to start again? A girl who dreams to be the first in her line to go to school is the most vivid of things, like the one red spark that stands up to the sky in a chorus of wet logs. These we know as truths, not wonders. The miracle isn't just in a girl being the first. It's in her seeing that which is non-existent. It's in her seeing the blank spaces of an untouched sky and sculpting her own dreams into the emptiness. A girl who is the first is a vision in and of herself. These girls don't want to be unbelievable. They want to be believed in. For educated girls not to be a marvel, but a movement. Friends, as women ministers, not only do we have an awesome opportunity to support global education of girls, we have the opportunity to step into education, not to be a marvel, but to be a movement. God is calling us to be a movement of great commissioners that are ready to usher in a great awakening. Thank you for joining us. We'll look forward to seeing you next time.